What's one family saying or phrase you heard growing up that still sticks with you?
They laughed. Not the kind of polite, half-hearted laugh you give someone when they say something awkward or a little off. No, they laughed like I'd just told the best damn joke of the year, like I was standing in the middle of that backyard with a clown nose and a floppy hat, juggling flaming torches of desperation. And I just stood there, holding a paper plate of cold chicken salad, wondering when exactly I'd turned into the punchline. It was Labor Day weekend, one of those forced family gatherings where everyone pretends we still have something in common beyond blood and guilt. Uncle Ron had fired up his $10,000 gas grill, the one he liked to remind everyone was imported from Switzerland, and was feeding steaks to my brother Tom like he was some kind of war hero instead of a 35-year-old man who still called our mother when his electric bill looked suspiciously high. And me? I was trying to get a second helping of mac and cheese without looking like I was stress eating. We all had our roles. So I said it. I asked, calmly, like it was no big deal, if there was any chance I could get some help, just a little, with my remaining student loans. I was almost done. Only about 14 grand left, and I'd been chipping away at it for over a decade. I was working full-time, still living in that same one-bedroom apartment with the leaky faucet and the neighbors who screamed at each other every other night, but I'd done everything right. I paid every cent myself, never missed a payment, never asked for a dime from anyone. And then they laughed. It started with Uncle Ron. That obnoxious, wheezy, open-mouthed kind of laugh, like he couldn't believe what he'd just heard. Then my dad chimed in with that sharp bark of his, the same one he used when he used to coach Little League. Even my cousin Janice, who once borrowed 6 grand from me to fix her car and never paid it back, snorted into her wine cooler and said, "Come on, Nat, you're the smart one. You'll figure it out." That's what did it. Not the fact that they said no. I expected no. I was prepared for no. But the laughing? That told me everything I needed to know about what I meant to these people. I was the one who babysat their kids when they wanted a weekend away, who showed up early and stayed late, and helped clean up when the parties were over. I was the one who took Tom's calls at 2 in the morning when he was drunk and lost and scared, the one who covered the overdraft fees when he used Mom's debit card to buy vape cartridges and wings. And yet somehow, in their eyes, I was still the one who needed to be reminded of my place. I didn't say anything. I didn't storm off or cry or throw my plate. I just nodded like it was all one big misunderstanding and walked to my car as calmly as if I were going to the store for milk. No one followed. No one asked if I was okay. And maybe that silence was the loudest thing of all. On the drive home, I didn't even turn on the radio. Just silence and headlights and the dull throb of my heart beating a little too fast. I kept replaying that moment, the laughter, the smug little grins, the way Tom didn't even look up from his phone. Like I'd asked for something absurd. Like my effort, my work, my goddamn persistence wasn't worth a damn. You want to know the real kicker? 2 days later, I got a text from my mom. It was a photo of Tom sitting in what looked like an office, sleek desk, big windows, some overpriced-looking painting behind him, with the caption, "Your brother's new job. Uncle Ron says he's going to be great for the family business." And underneath that, they're calling it a moral support role. Isn't that cute? Moral support. They couldn't spare $500 to help me finish paying off a loan that got me 2 degrees, but they created a job, with a salary, benefits, and a signing bonus, for my brother to sit in meetings and offer emotional insights, for a company that sells imported espresso machines to luxury hotels. My brother, who once asked if Vermont was a country, was now the official mood consultant for Ron's company. I stared at that photo until my screen went dark. And then I did something I hadn't done in years. I cried. Not because I was broke. I wasn't. Not because I needed them to save me. I didn't. I cried because I finally saw it clearly, the truth I'd been avoiding for so long. They never saw me as someone to invest in. They saw me as a tool. A dependable, always functioning, emotionally available tool. And when that tool finally needed a little maintenance, a little grace, they laughed in its face. It wasn't just about money. It never is. It was about respect. About dignity. About how a family shows you or refuses to show you that you matter. And once that switch flips in your brain, once you see the pecking order they pretend doesn't exist, it changes everything. I didn't text my mom back. I didn't respond when Tom sent me a YouTube link to his company's Employee Spotlight video where he talks about intuition-based leadership. I didn't show up to Janice's baby shower or Walter's 70th birthday dinner. I started clearing my calendar of every family obligation like it was a to-do list for someone else's life. Because deep down, I think they were right about one thing. I will figure it out. But not the way they expect. Not by grinding away at a thankless job and smiling through disrespect. Not by showing up when no one shows up for me. Not by pretending that loyalty should survive mockery. They don't know it yet, but something shifted that afternoon by the grill. And the next time I show up, if I ever do, it won't be with a plate and a fake smile. It'll be with a plan. You don't really notice the moment when you become invisible to your own family, not at first, not when you're young and trying so hard to earn their love, or at the very least their acknowledgement, like it's some prize you can win if you just keep proving yourself useful, reliable, quiet, and self-sacrificing. It creeps up on you slowly, like a fog rolling over your life in pieces, until one day you realize that everything you've done, every good grade, every job promotion, every time you bit your tongue instead of saying what you really felt, all of it has just been swallowed up and forgotten, while someone else, someone louder, needier, and easier to pity, has been handed the spotlight without doing a single thing to deserve it. I was 9 when I started packing Tom's lunches because Mom said she was too tired after working double shifts at the diner and Dad was gone on some training mission or whatever else he did in those endless stretches of time where he was just a voice on the answering machine and a lecture waiting to happen. Tom was 6 then, all elbows and snot and big eyes that always got him out of trouble. He used to cry if his sandwich didn't have the crust cut off, and I'd stand there on the step stool with a butter knife, making sure it looked like Mom made it so he wouldn't feel bad. It became a habit, one of many, and it never stopped, not even when we were teenagers, and he was stealing my car and lying to our parents about it. They say oldest daughters are raised as second mothers, and I used to roll my eyes at those kinds of internet quotes, thinking they were just overdramatic nonsense, but now I wonder if maybe they weren't dramatic enough. By the time I hit 16, I was balancing school, work, and basically running the house when Mom's migraines got bad and Dad was too wrapped up in his own bitterness about the world not turning out the way he planned. I was the one who paid the electric bill when it got shut off because they'd forgotten it was due. I was the one who made sure Tom did enough homework not to fail out completely. And when he did fail out anyway, not once did anyone ask what I needed, what I was going through, or whether I was okay holding everything together while my own life quietly fell apart. College was supposed to be my way out, the reward for playing by the rules, for carrying everyone else's baggage without complaint. I remember the day my acceptance letter came from Michigan State. I'd gotten into the honors college and I thought, stupidly, that my parents would be proud. Dad barely looked up from his newspaper. Mom said, that's far, like distance was more important than achievement. They didn't offer help, didn't ask about scholarships, didn't even drive me up there when I left. I packed my things into my beat-up Civic and drove north alone with everything I owned shoved into laundry baskets and garbage bags. I didn't even cry when I got there. I was used to doing things by myself. I worked 2 jobs all through college. One at a bookstore where the manager hit on every girl under 25, and one cleaning dorm bathrooms at night when I should have been studying. I graduated with honors, even made the dean's list 5 semesters straight, but they never came to see me walk across the stage. Tom had gotten arrested that week for drunk driving, and my parents said they couldn't be in 2 places at once. So they chose him. Again. And then came grad school, the internships, the unpaid labor that's supposed to build experience, the endless cycle of doing the right thing and still having to choose between groceries and paying down interest. I watched friends get help from their parents, down payments, wedding money, student loans just wiped out without a second thought, while I lived paycheck to paycheck, trying to stay afloat in a city where rent was a joke and groceries cost more every week. But I didn't complain. I told myself I was building a life they'd have to respect eventually, that if I just kept pushing, one day they'd look at me the way they looked at Tom, like someone who mattered, even when he did nothing. It's pathetic, really, the way I used to beg for scraps of recognition, thinking if I could just accomplish enough, they'd finally treat me like someone worth something. The worst part is, even when Tom hit rock bottom, and God knows he hit it more than once, they still managed to paint him as the one who needed support. The time he lost his job for skipping work? He's under a lot of pressure. The time he blew $2,000 on a pyramid scheme? He just wants to get ahead. When he got evicted. Can you help him out a little, Nat? You've always been the strong one. I loaned him rent money twice. Once during grad school when I had to eat oatmeal for 2 weeks straight so he wouldn't have to crash at our parents' again. And what did he do with it? Took his new girlfriend to Vegas. I only found out because she posted the hotel suite on Instagram. I said nothing. I swallowed it. I always did. Because being the strong one isn't a compliment. It's just a convenient excuse for everyone to lean on you while giving you nothing back. It means you get to suffer silently while everyone else gets second, third, and fourth chances. It means you become invisible, not because you're unimportant, but because your suffering doesn't make them feel heroic to fix it. Now, years later, I see it all clearly. The house was never balanced. The scale was tilted from the start. My pain didn't matter because it wasn't loud, wasn't dramatic, wasn't reckless enough to force their attention. And now that I've finally said enough, now that I've stepped back and started to reclaim my time, they act confused. Hurt, even. Like I'm the villain in a story where I was never even treated as a main character. There's a photo from one Thanksgiving, I think I was 24, and Tom was freshly unemployed again. I'm holding a dish, smiling at the camera, but my eyes look tired. He's in the background, grinning, beer in hand, wearing a shirt I bought him because he didn't have anything presentable for dinner. It hit me the other day. He never even said thank you. And maybe that's the moment I finally understood. It wasn't that I failed to ask for help. It was that they never planned to offer it. Not to me. They only help the ones who demand it loudly, even if they've done nothing to earn it. And I was too polite, too loyal, too stupid to see it sooner. But not anymore. That version of me, the dependable one, the invisible fixer, she's gone now. They just haven't realized it yet. It's funny how people will twist the definition of a word until it's so far removed from its original meaning that it starts to resemble a joke, but not the kind of joke you laugh at, more like the kind that sits in your chest and festers. The bitter kind that makes your jaw clench and your stomach twist because you know deep down it was never meant to be funny in the first place. That's how I felt the first time I heard the phrase, moral support consultant, used with a straight face, in a conversation that involved my brother Tom, my uncle Ron, and an annual salary that made me physically sick. Because when I asked for help with the last stretch of my student loans, money I needed not for luxury, not for convenience, but for survival and a sliver of peace, they laughed and told me I was smart enough to figure it out on my own. And just weeks later, they handed my emotionally unstable, professionally unqualified, and endlessly coddled brother a paid position that, by all logical standards, did not need to exist. It started with a photo. My mother, whose greatest act of subtle cruelty was pretending she didn't know how her words could sting, sent me a cheerful picture of Tom in an office that looked like it belonged in a Netflix startup documentary, exposed brick walls, ridiculous glass whiteboards, and a coffee station more expensive than my first car. He was grinning like a man who had stumbled into someone else's success, wearing a button-down shirt I knew he didn't buy himself, with a caption that read, "Your brother's finally turning things around." Uncle Ron says he's got a real gift for motivation. I stared at that message for nearly 5 minutes, not because I didn't understand it, but because I understood too well. I knew exactly what was happening. I knew that Tom had been handed something not because he earned it, not because he worked for it, not even because he needed it more than I did, but because he fit into this family's preferred narrative, the lovable mess who always gets rescued, no matter how many times he sets fire to his own life. He wasn't a burden to them, he was a project. And projects, especially the ones who flatter and entertain, are always easier to love than people who quietly take care of things without making a scene. Later that week, I did a little digging. I wasn't looking for anything in particular, or at least that's what I told myself. but I ended up going through public records, LinkedIn profiles, corporate filings. You'd be surprised what you can find when you stop caring about your own dignity. Turns out, the so-called job title, moral support consultant, wasn't just a nickname or a fluke. It was on paper, written into the HR documentation for Ron's company, filed under advisory services. Salary, $72,000 a year. Plus a company card. Plus flexible remote hours. No deliverables. No schedule. Just availability for creative team building, emotional encouragement, and leadership presence. I remember reading those words over and over, my pulse loud in my ears, the room spinning just slightly, the kind of slow, quiet rage that doesn't scream but simmers. I had clawed my way through college, worked nights scrubbing puke out of campus bathrooms, begged landlords to give me 2 more weeks, stood in line at the pharmacy calculating whether I could afford both my birth control and toothpaste, and he gets paid more than me to offer emotional encouragement? My brother, who once told me women shouldn't be in charge of money because they're too emotional, now being paid for his emotional insight? I didn't say anything to the family right away. I think I wanted to see how far they'd go with the charade. I started paying attention to how they talked about him, the little updates my mom would slip into our calls like she wasn't bragging, Tom's really coming into his own, or he's mentoring some of the younger guys at Ron's office. Apparently he's great at building morale. They said it like they wanted me to be proud. Like I should be happy that the golden child had finally done something. And the worst part was, he knew exactly what was happening. He knew he was getting a handout dressed up as a reward, but instead of being embarrassed or grateful, he leaned into it, smug and oblivious as ever. Then came the moment that made everything shift. My phone rang while I was at work. It was Kenny, the HR manager at my firm, a man known more for his love of golf and sarcasm than for getting involved in anyone's business, and he sounded off. He said, "Hey Nat, just checking. Did you authorize a third party to contact us about your current emotional wellness plan?" I blinked. What? He went on to explain, in his usual dry tone, that someone had called their HR department claiming to be my mental health representative, inquiring about the details of my company's leave policies, counseling coverage, and whether or not they offered family-based work accommodations. He said the man's name was Tom. My brother. I couldn't even process it at first. The violation of it. The sheer audacity. He had used his fake job as moral support advisor as an excuse to meddle in my professional life, as if I was now a subject of his pathetic corporate therapy role-playing game. And worse, he'd done it without telling me. Without even asking if I needed anything. Without permission. I told Kenny I had no idea he'd done that, and Kenny, to his credit, muttered something like, "Didn't think so," and then paused before saying, "You've got some colorful people in your life." That night, I sat on my bed with my laptop open and stared at my inbox. There were emails from my team, reminders from my dentist, a digital coupon from the grocery store, and in between them, the emptiness of no apology, no acknowledgement, no explanation. Just silence. That silence wasn't new, but this time, I heard it differently. This time, I realized it wasn't ignorance or forgetfulness. It was entitlement. It was a family who had decided a long time ago that my role was to carry, and Tom's was to be carried, and nothing I did would ever be enough to flip those roles around. I didn't respond to Tom. I didn't confront him, not yet. Instead, I opened a new folder on my desktop, named it Exit Strategy, and began to make a list, not just of the steps I'd need to take to disappear from the circus with my dignity intact, but of the ways I could burn the tent down on the way out, without ever getting my hands dirty. Because they thought they'd broken me with laughter, with indifference, with ridiculous job titles and fake concern, but what they really did was hand me the one thing I never had before, clarity. And with clarity comes power. And with power comes planning. And I had just begun. There's a strange, almost serene kind of silence that settles in once you stop pretending that anything is salvageable, not the relationships, not the sense of fairness, not the fantasy that maybe, just maybe, if you work hard enough or stay humble long enough, someone will finally say the words you've been waiting for your entire life, "You matter just as much." It's a cold clarity, The kind that doesn't come from drama or confrontation, but from finally realizing that the very people who claim to love you will let you drown if it means keeping someone else comfortably afloat, and worse. They'll call it family loyalty while you sink. After that phone call from Kenny, after I learned that my own brother had tried to involve himself in my job, under the guise of concern, by pretending to be a sort of unauthorized therapist in a fake suit of professionalism, I didn't cry or shout or spiral into some emotional breakdown. Instead, I did something that surprised even me. I laughed. Not the kind of bitter, broken laugh that shakes out of you when you've lost control, but a slow, almost amused recognition that the game had officially changed. Because if they thought they could manage and manipulate my life like some extension of their make-believe power structure, then it was time for me to stop playing the part of the exhausted, dependable daughter and start behaving like the woman they underestimated for far too long. I knew I couldn't just walk away, not yet, not without making it count. So, I started laying the groundwork. First, I went through every benefit and policy in my company's HR system, something most people would never bother with, but I knew it inside out because I helped write those damn documents during my time in compliance. I used the wellness clause, a tiny paragraph tucked between two vague bullet points about burnout and work-life balance, to request a paid leave of absence, citing personal development and stress-related fatigue. Kenny signed off on it with a dry, "Sounds like a smart move," and just like that, I had 3 months of fully paid freedom to execute what I came to call, in the privacy of my mind, my quiet exit and not-so-quiet revenge. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't post cryptic quotes on social media or drop hints in the family group chat. I simply became less available. I answered messages with brief, impersonal replies. I turned down invitations. I let the silence grow, not out of malice, but because I wanted them to feel the absence, the void that appears when the person who always picks up the slack finally stops. And while they were busy wondering if I was just going through a phase, I was digging through public databases, financial filings, and business reports on Uncle Ron's company. Turns out, moral support may be a cute title at a barbecue, but on paper, it's not just laughable, it's legally dubious, especially when it's attached to company funds that are technically earmarked for operations and consulting services. I didn't need to scream or make threats. I didn't even have to send a warning. I contacted a friend of a friend who worked in corporate regulatory compliance, someone who owed me a favor after I helped her with a case 2 years prior, and I asked her one simple question. What would happen if a small business was misusing operational tax credits to fund non-essential, unqualified roles that had no actual function or measurable output? Her answer was concise. If someone reports it with documentation, and if it's tied to inflated expense filings or misrepresented payroll entries, it could trigger a review. And depending on the scale, maybe even an audit. I didn't have to forge anything. The stupidity was already documented, payroll memos that described Tom's role using words like vibe management and creative empathy, reimbursement logs showing entertainment expenses that were clearly personal, and emails where Ron described Tom as more of a family morale symbol than a deliverables guy. It was all right there, sitting in company files like a case study in nepotistic fraud. All I did was send the packet to the right agency under an anonymous email address and wait. And in the meantime, I made plans to disappear the right way. I booked a short-term rental in Portland, not because I had some great love for the Pacific Northwest, but because it was far, clean, and distant enough to feel like starting over without having to fake an accent. I began canceling automatic payments, consolidating accounts, severing subscriptions, changing mailing addresses. I submitted my notice to my apartment management company and told them I'd be gone in 30 days. They didn't ask why. I didn't explain. I just smiled and handed over the keys when the time came, knowing I was walking away from more than just square footage. 2 weeks after I sent the report, I got a text from Janice, that cousin with the permanent smirk and the superiority complex, asking if I'd heard anything about Ron's business going under review. I replied with a simple nope. Weird, and turned my phone off for the day. 3 days later, Tom posted a story on social media of himself looking bewildered, saying something vague about office drama and haters trying to tear down what we built. what they built. The man had been at that job for 3 months, and he already acted like he'd personally launched it from scratch. And then, just like that, he stopped posting altogether. The texts from my mother became more frequent. Short. Nervous. Are you okay? We miss you. Tom's had a rough week. Call me when you can. I didn't reply. I watched from a distance as the golden boy's glitter started to peel, and for once in my life, I didn't feel guilty. Not even a little. Because what none of them seemed to understand was that when you build a system that rewards weakness and punishes reliability, eventually the people you depend on will stop showing up. And when they stop, the whole structure starts to shake. By the time the audit letters reached Ron's office, I was already unpacking in a 2-bedroom unit with high windows, hardwood floors, and not a single memory attached to its walls. I hadn't smiled that wide in years. The silence here was different, not lonely, but earned. I didn't burn bridges. I just walked away and let their own fire catch up to them. There is a specific kind of peace that comes not from forgiveness, not from closure, and certainly not from reconciliation, but from the slow, intentional act of severing yourself from the roles that were assigned to you long before you were old enough to understand their weight. Roles like caregiver, fixer, emotional sponge, family glue, all handed to me without consent, without acknowledgement, and certainly without reciprocation. The kind of peace I found after moving across the country didn't come wrapped in a bow or delivered with dramatic finality. Instead, it arrived like a quiet tide washing over all the noise I'd left behind, the manipulations disguised as concern, the lies wrapped in laughter, and the hollow gestures of a family that had, for far too long, expected my loyalty without offering theirs in return. 6 months had passed since I arrived in Portland, though in many ways, it felt like I'd only just begun to breathe for the first time in years, like I'd been holding my breath under the weight of constant expectations, waiting for someone to notice that I was drowning while I kept smiling and passing the potatoes at dinner. My new apartment wasn't anything extraordinary by magazine standards. 2 bedrooms, clean lines, light that came in at just the right angle during early morning hours, but to me, it was sacred. It was the first space I had ever lived in that wasn't built on compromise, on shared history, or on obligation. There were no ghosts of conversations that ended in guilt, no echoes of slammed doors or forced smiles, and certainly no family portraits hung just to maintain the illusion that everything had always been fine. I had a new job now, one that didn't require me to justify my boundaries or explain why I preferred facts over feelings. My title, HR Compliance and Ethics Lead, might sound boring to most people, but to me, it was liberation. Because what they didn't know, what no one in my former life would ever guess, was that the company I now worked for happened to be a direct competitor to Uncle Ron's boutique espresso machine import firm. A detail I hadn't planned, but had taken as a sign when the offer letter came through. When I told them I had insight into the family-run structures and their internal vulnerabilities, they practically welcomed me with a red carpet. I never once mentioned that I was the source of Ron's audit troubles. I didn't have to. The market spoke for itself. I hadn't spoken to Tom since the day Kenny called me about the impersonation stunt. Not a text, not a call, not a passive-aggressive, just checking in message. And the silence between us, though thick and strange at first, eventually settled into something that felt like resolution. From what I'd pieced together through vague updates from Janice's social media and occasional mentions from old coworkers, the audit had hit Ron's company harder than expected. The books had been cooked sloppily, as if they truly believed no one would ever look behind the curtain, and when the IRS started digging, it wasn't just Tom's fake role they questioned, it was the entire foundation. Several positions were eliminated, vendor relationships suspended, and whatever advisory contract Tom had, it vanished into thin air like it had never existed. Eventually, he moved back in with our parents, and although I don't know the details, and frankly, I don't want to, I do know that the fantasy had ended. No more suited selfies. No more wellness quotes about leadership. Just the quiet, pathetic sound of a grown man returning to the same childhood bedroom he once tried to escape through drunken rebellions and failed ventures. My mother, always the slowest to catch on, began sending small messages, carefully curated to appear innocent but steeped in guilt, like little breadcrumbs meant to lead me back to the role she desperately wanted me to resume. One package contained homemade cookies, another had a pair of gloves she thought I'd like, and the most recent one, the one that made me laugh out loud for reasons I couldn't quite explain, contained a small photo album labeled Memories, with pictures from childhood holidays, barbecues, and awkward family reunions where I'd always been the one holding the camera. Tucked between 2 pages was a folded note, written in her familiar, slightly shaky handwriting. "We miss you. Things aren't the same without you. Tom's been having a hard time. Please call." I didn't. I didn't need to. Because what they really missed wasn't me, not the real me, not the woman I had become, not the one who finally said no, but the version of me who absorbed their dysfunction without complaint, who stood in the shadows holding the scaffolding so their lives wouldn't collapse. They missed their emotional insurance policy, not their daughter. I kept only one thing from that package, not the cookies, not the gloves, not the photo album, but a voicemail that came a few days later, left by my father, whose voice had always been sharp, authoritative, the final say in any discussion. But in that recording, his voice was different, smaller, slower, uncertain in a way I had never heard before. "Hey Nat," he began, clearing his throat like he was stalling for time. "I know I probably don't deserve a call back, but I guess we messed up. I don't know when it all went sideways, but I know we didn't see you the way we should have. I hope you're happy. I really do." I listened to that voicemail exactly once. I didn't cry. I didn't feel vindicated. What I felt was something far more unsettling, the realization that even if they understood now, even if they finally saw what they had done, it didn't change what it had cost me to get here. Regret is not redemption. Recognition is not repair. I stood by the window of my new apartment that evening, watching the light turn golden as it slipped between the trees, and I let myself feel the weight of everything, not the pain, not the anger, but the release. I had built a life out of nothing, carved it with blood and patience and the quiet endurance of someone who had been overlooked for far too long. And now, finally, I lived in a space of my own making, with walls that didn't echo their judgments and a future that didn't include their expectations. Sometimes I wonder if they sit around the old dining room table and ask each other what happened, how I became so distant, how I could cut them off after everything they did for me. Completely blind to the fact that the very things they thought were generosity were actually control in disguise. And maybe, in their quieter moments, they tell themselves a story, that I'm confused, that I'm angry, that one day I'll come around and return to the fold. But they don't understand, and maybe they never will, that the version of me they're waiting for no longer exists. I didn't leave because I hated them. I left because I finally loved myself more than their comfort. And maybe that's what they'll never forgive. But I can live with that. Can they?